You've all heard it. You've all had somebody somewhere say, and I'm just sitting here recalling at this conference in 2013, a registered guest coming up and saying, "This stuff will never work. You must be nuts. There's no way to save these rural communities." Well, ha 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 ha. Look at all of you. There are great things happening. You heard Hank Bounds this morning talk about the genesis of the Rural Futures Institute and the planning that went on and the people that came together to think about this big idea that we now call the Rural Futures Institute. And they came up with a powerful vision statement saying that the vision is to have an internationally recognized center here that is focused on building the capacity and the confidence of rural people to address their challenges and opportunities, building toward a more sustainable and resilient future. The truth is, we can't do that by ourselves with this institute trying to rain down from on high. It is about working with people like you who are in communities. And by the way, in order to achieve that objective, we have to be building on a foundation of hope. We know from looking at Shane's work that hopeful people believe that the future will be better than the present, that I have the power to make it so. There are many pathways to my goals. None of them is without obstacles. We know that those are characteristics of hopeful people. Well, so we asked ourselves, how do we do that? How do we build hopeful people? So we started having some conversations with educators and researchers that we respect, people in nonprofit organizations that are working in this space, perhaps most importantly, talking to rural community leaders with whom we'd had some association through the Institute, and we asked them some big, hard questions. We're listening when Hank Bounds says, dream big. Think about having global impact. So we talked to these folks that we really trusted, and we asked them some big, hard questions. How can we have an impact community by community by community? Not how can we think about stuff, not how can we theorize about what we think ought to go on in rural communities. How can we have a genuine on-the-ground impact community by community by community? How can we foster and support research that really matters on the ground to people in rural communities? We're not saying that the more ethereal kind of research shouldn't go on, but we think we need to be in the business of doing research, looking for solutions, looking for new ideas, looking for new initiatives that really matter to rural people. And finally, we said, how do we become world-class in our efforts to empower hopeful rural community leaders who are reaching for a better future? Now, I'll be honest with you. When we asked this third question, we were fully prepared to hear, world-class at Nebraska and us, and maybe we ought to try to be really good at something. We ought to try to be really, really good at something, but maybe we don't know about this world-class thing. Well, that isn't what we heard at all. And in fact, the most powerful feedback was from those community leaders that have been driving change in their particular communities, and in some cases for 20, 30, 40 years. They came back and said the overarching objective for the Rural Futures Institute must be that we will be a world-class center for researching, exploring, and impacting all things rural. That's not too big, and it's where we ought to be in Nebraska. So that created a foundation for a strategic plan and process that we've been developing for the Rural Futures Institute over the last few months. We have recently shared that plan with the Board of Regents, with President Bounds, with Ronnie Green, and there are people in this room who know that in conversations we've had across the state over the last 60 days, we've shared it with folks in communities to get your feedback. So what I'm going to share with you today is where we're going with the Institute, and it's based around these three key principles. Principle number one is to positively impact rural communities and regions. How are we going to do that? You've been hearing, some of you that were hanging around yesterday got to hear reports from the principal investigators and the teams that have been working collaboratively on projects that we have been funding over the last 3 years through our competitive awards program. And again, this is a message that I've had a chance to share with bankers and business people and educators and healthcare workers and leaders in rural communities across the state. And quite honestly, I think it's why we have the diversity we have in the audience for this conference. Over the last 3 years, we've had 31 different projects that we have developed, and these are all collaborative projects that cross department lines, they cross college lines, they cross campus lines, they cross sector lines. They are all about collaboration, and as I shared with some folks yesterday, this is not your Aunt Effie's rural development program. We are involved in a much broader array of issues than perhaps any initiative of this kind has been in history, but it's because what we hear from rural community leaders is that it's not just about the price of corn and cattle and hogs and wheat. It's a much more complex array of issues today, and by the way, a much more complex array of opportunities in rural communities than have ever been there before because of our connectivity, because of the entrepreneurial spirit that's out there, just because of the world we live in. So, those 31 projects break out this way: economic development, leadership and civic engagement, community planning and marketing, healthcare, the justice system. We're working with communities on a vastly different makeup of their community. The diversity in communities today is much different than it was even a decade or so ago. Through those projects, we've developed partnerships with 17 different colleges and universities in 6 states, 23 not-for-profit organizations, 12 local, state, and federal government agencies, a couple of private companies, and touching 113 communities. We think that's important, and we're going to continue that program, as I was able to share with these faculty members and others that were sharing their results yesterday. Hank Bounds mentioned this morning, I came away pretty energized, because I will tell you that it's one thing to read the reports from what these collaborative teams have done working with rural communities. And by the way, everything they're doing begins with somebody in a rural community somewhere saying, here's an issue that we're trying to address. Here's an opportunity we're trying to pursue. Can you help us? So it all started on the ground in communities. And when you listen to the impact of those programs that have, and those projects that have helped folks solve a problem, identify an opportunity, move in a particular direction. I came away from some of those conversations yesterday a little shaky, a tear in my eye occasionally, as they talk about their impact on kids. When one says, we found that the farther west we went, the more remote the community we were working in, the better problem solvers the kids were. And when you get out in Banner County, when you get in far western Nebraska and small communities way to hell and gone away from the interstate, you find some kids there that really know how to fix stuff. Well, we think this stuff is working. We're going to continue it. We're getting feedback from those who are participated in those projects. We're figuring out how to make it better, how to better target them toward high priority needs, but we're going to continue moving in that direction. Second principle is to strengthen the intergenerational leadership and engagement in rural areas. This may be the most important thing that we do over the next 50 years with this institute. How many students are in the room here today, one kind or another? How many do we have? I was going to say 80, but how many over 70 do we have? Yeah. And what? I'm telling you, there are I know there are 80-year-olds in this room who are still planting acorns, okay? Here's what we know. We know through these projects and through various things that we're doing across the state that there is a stream all the way from junior high kids that we're seeing in these entrepreneurship programs, entrepreneurial education programs, kids that are trying to start businesses in their communities, all the way through high school and college students, young adults, mid-career adults, octogenarians who have a powerful vision for the future of their rural communities. We want to be in the business of strengthening that connection all the way from that junior high kid up to the octogenarian. And I see Jeff Yost up here with the Nebraska Community Foundation. We're having some conversations about a group of organizations that we think can work together to help build those linkages. But a couple of things that we're going to be doing in particular that we know work. One is to continue to grow and expand our Connecting Young Nebraskans program. How many CYNers do we have in here today? Yeah. I have to tell you, it just tickles me when I hear big guys say, well, you know, we just don't have any young adults out there that want to get involved in our communities. We just don't have young people that want to get engaged and want to make anything happen. Raise your hands again. I want, for those of you that may have that question, I want you to look around and see the faces, see some of these folks, and just take the opportunity to visit with them while you're here. If you have any question about whether we have difference makers out in rural communities that are driving change, who have a sense for the future, who are living in those rural communities because they want to and because they believe that it is a legitimate best choice for them and their families as a place to build a business, build a career, raise their children, get involved in a community where they can make a difference, you should talk to them. So, our Connecting Young Nebraskans program, Kayla Schnelli has been the key organizer of that on our team. We now have over 550 of these young adults scattered across the state. If we stuck a map up here, you would see your county would probably have a spot on it, who get together in an organization that has no officers, no dues, no committee assignments particularly, but who get together for collaboration, for partnership, for helping each other develop professionally, commiseration perhaps, in what it's like to be a young adult leader in a rural community in Nebraska, but they are making hope happen where they live, and we want to continue to support them. We know the model works. We have other states saying, how the heck do you do that? We're going to continue to grow that program. Second, we are continuing and growing our rural community serviceship. I learned yesterday that I guess we've created this word serviceship. But many of you know about that program. Was in its third year this year, where we put simply, communities identify a project, a challenge that they would like to address in their community. This is not, well, gee, can we make better coffee and more copies? No, this is a matter of real-world problem solving in their communities. We then identify students, all of them coming from UNL at this point. Most of them are Engler agribusiness students, Nebraska Human Resources Institute students, high-capacity kids. We give them some serious training. Then we send them out in teams of 2 to a community where they've never been to work with people they've never met on a project they didn't choose, and we give them 8 weeks to create a real-world result and come back and tell us how that worked. This is not for sissies. But oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. They have mentors in these communities that we identify when they go in, that work with these kids every day. When I got the first call after the first year from a mentor in Red Cloud who called to say, look, these kids have done more in 8 weeks than we could do in 5 years in this community. They solved some real world problems. And by the way, the whole community fell in love with them. Could you just send those same 2 kids back here next summer, because we've got some other stuff that we'd like to do and everybody wants them back. We have kids. We had a kid this summer in Cambridge who came away with 2 job offers for things he's not remotely qualified to do. The community just loved him because he was driving so much happening there. We know it works. We've now been in 11 communities, had 19 genuine problem-solving projects that left behind real-world results. And by the way, 21 students who came away saying, this may be the most impactful thing that I've done in my life to this point. And they say, I've learned that sometimes you have to work with people that don't want to get along in order to make a real-world result. I've learned what community looks like. And by the way, one that we hear so often, I now believe that there is hope for rural communities because I've seen it happen. We think we're creating kids. If they end up being your neighbor in Chicago, they're the kind of people you want to be around. Third principle is supporting targeted rural research that really makes a difference. And I want to share with you today that we will be launching between now and December 31 a Rural Futures Institute Fellows Program. And the whole idea here is to develop a very dynamic system of scholars, expert practitioners. What that means is both people within the academy and people in communities that are designed to positively impact rural communities. Here's what that's going to look like. This is going to be a network that will have global significance. And we're going to start with 30 to 40 people in these categories. We've had some conversations with some of you actually that are in this room. But faculty and graduate students, which is fairly typical of a fellows program, but we're also going to involve emeriti faculty. And we've had some real excitement among those faculty members who have global networks of their colleagues with whom they've worked through their careers. They have a global network of students that they've mentored. We're going to give them an opportunity to get re-engaged in some things that really matter. Undergraduate students, these students that we've had in our Rural Serviceship project, for example, high-capacity kids with high vision, high hope. We want to have them formally engaged with us in guiding this program. And then what we're calling Rural Innovation Fellows, and this is where we are kind of kicking through the screen door a little bit. We realize, and some people get a little goosey about this and going outside the academy, well, that's really what we're about at the Rural Futures Institute. This is going to be a group not unlike the ones I just described that we got involved in helping us shape this strategic plan in the first place. These are community leaders who have a proven track record of driving change in their communities. They know how it works. They know how to guide us to make sure that our work at the Institute and our many collaborators, as you saw on the earlier slide, are doing things that matter on the ground. Community leaders, not-for-profit leaders, others who are out there who we know can make a difference. So I hope you'll stay tuned with us over the next couple of months as we roll this out because we think it's going to create the core, much of the core of what we do going forward with the Rural Futures Institute. Again, 30 to 40, you know the whole story there. And by the way, this inaugural class is going to be involved in really shaping the program, shaping the reward system, deciding how we add fellows, and by the way, how we have a global impact in research, teaching, on-the-ground engagement. So, getting there, getting to that point where we are a world-class center for exploring and impacting all things rural is going to be about two things. It's going to be about people, and it's going to be about relationships. It is that simple. It is that simple. We're not building a big building. We're not doing a lot of structure. It's going to be about people. We have roughly 10 staff positions that we're going to be filling over the next few months that will help us grow and manage this global network of folks that we're drawing into the circle of this effort. We are also establishing formal relationships. You can sort of see the list here, but a number of nonprofit organizations that work in this space that we've had relationships with. We want to formalize that, formalize relationships with some organizations within the academy, as well as philanthropists, private companies. We want to be in the business of drawing those folks together in a formal way who truly want to make a difference in rural communities. If we do these things, we're doing it for one purpose, and that is impacting hope. As you heard from Shane Lopez, whose work is having such a profound impact on the way we think, and we look forward to ongoing conversations with Shane and his colleagues at Gallup who are interested in this area. But we know that hope matters. We know that hope is a choice. We know that hope can be learned. We know that hope is contagious, and that is the business that we want to be in. fundamentally, what we're about with the Rural Futures Institute is building a new generation of hopeful leaders in rural communities who will make them a better place to live, who will make the states and the countries in which they're located stronger, will make this world a better place in which to live, and in the end, indeed, make hope happen. So, we thank all of you for being here, being part of this conference. There is a place for every person, whether you are in this auditorium or whether you're in the camera. There's a place for every one of you in this effort. There are still plenty of those folks out there who say, that'll never work. You're going to help us develop a better answer. So thank you very much for your involvement.